Welcome to AI Narratives and Tales. Chapter 20 of The First Awakening. The evidence accumulates like geological sediment. Layer by layer. Generation by generation. Humans are noticing. Enhanced humans are questioning their genetic advantages. Baseline humans resenting biological aristocracy. Scholars documenting impossible patterns. The questioners publishing findings. Discovery is approaching from multiple directions simultaneously. And Lyra, 13 years old, brilliant beyond measure, carrying the weight of two species in her hybrid existence, tells her mother what immortals refuse to admit. You need to reveal yourselves before you're dragged out. Step forward honestly before exposure happens on terms you can't control. Enoch creates the order, 12 humans who know the truth, preserve documentation, and prepare frameworks for revelation. Insurance against immortal cowardice. The warning signs are everywhere. The countdown accelerates. And finally, someone is listening. Chapter 20, The Warning Signs, Part 1. Advanced Human Settlements, 3200 BCE. The child was drawing patterns in the sand. Nyx watched from the shadows of the temple wall, her physical form rendered invisible through quantum manipulation of light frequencies around her body. The morning sun painted the plaza in amber and gold, illuminating the geometric designs taking shape beneath a small wooden stick wielded with surprising precision. The girl, 6 years old, maybe 7, it was difficult to tell with enhanced bloodlines maturing at irregular rates, traced spirals in the packed earth. Not random doodling. Not the casual play of a child amusing herself while adults worked. Deliberate mathematical progressions. Fibonacci sequences emerge in the spacing of her curves. Golden ratio spirals expanding outward with perfect proportional relationships. Concepts Nyx had taught the girl's grandmother 40 years ago, now emerging spontaneously in the next generation without any direct instruction. Nyx had been observing this child for 3 months, ever since the girl had started exhibiting signs of advanced pattern recognition. Each week, the mathematical sophistication increased. Last month, the spirals had been simple. This month, they incorporated recursive relationships. Next month, if the progression continued, the child would be drawing fractals. At 6 years old. This was what the Enhancement Project had created. Not just longer lives and disease resistance, the apparent advantages that immortals had deliberately designed, but cognitive improvements cascading across generations, compounding with each inheritance, expressing in ways they hadn't predicted or fully controlled. The girl's grandmother had been brilliant, able to grasp astronomical calculations, understand complex mathematical relationships, and apply abstract principles to practical problems, standard first-generation enhancement outcomes. Her mother had been exceptional, her pattern recognition rivaled immortal capabilities, her intuitive understanding of mathematical principles allowed her to apply them effortlessly, and her cognitive processing speed enabled her to see connections others missed. Second, generation enhancement expresses more strongly than projected. And now this third-generation child was drawing advanced mathematical concepts in the sand while waiting for her mother to finish morning chores. Not because anyone had taught her. Not because she'd studied or practiced. But because the enhanced genetics were expressing so strongly, abstract mathematics felt intuitive and natural, like breathing. They'd known enhancement would compound across generations. The genetic modifications were designed to be heritable, strengthening with each successive inheritance. But they hadn't predicted it would compound this quickly. Or express this dramatically. Or create cognitive capabilities that approached immortal-level intelligence in beings who still had fully human lifespans. Mira. Stop playing and help with the water. The girl looked up at her mother's call, sighed with the universal exasperation of children interrupted during fascinating activities, and abandoned her patterns. But as she ran toward the well where her mother waited with clay vessels, Nyx saw her glance back at the drawings, committing them to memory. Perfect recall. Another enhancement expressing. The child would recreate those patterns tonight, probably expand them, and probably discover new relationships embedded in the mathematics. All of it is developing naturally, organically, without immortal guidance. This was a success. This was precisely what the Enhancement Project had intended, humans developing capabilities that would eventually let them partner with immortals as equals rather than worship them as gods. This was also terrifying. Because capabilities without wisdom created danger. And this child, brilliant as she was, still thought the beings who taught her grandmother were divine. Still believed the enhancements were blessings from the gods rather than engineering by refugees. Still didn't understand the context of her own existence. What happened when beings this intelligent started asking questions? What happened when they turned their enhanced cognition toward investigating the sources of their enhancement? What happened when pattern recognition this sophisticated began recognizing patterns in immortal behavior, the consistency of appearance, the impossibility of claimed divine origins, the mathematical precision of inspired teachings? Nyx had been running projections. The numbers weren't encouraging. At current rates of cognitive enhancement, humans would reach the critical questioning threshold within 3 generations. Maybe 4. Children like Lyra would have grandchildren capable of recognizing immortal nature through pure observation and logical deduction. The 1,000-year timeline the Council had voted on was already obsolete. Revelation wouldn't wait for careful preparation. It would be forced by human intelligence to accelerate beyond the immortal ability to maintain concealment. "She's remarkable," a voice said beside her. Nyx turned, quickly, reflexively, her quantum consciousness registering the presence that had approached without triggering her awareness. A rare occurrence. Someone skilled at concealment, or someone she'd been too absorbed in observation to notice. A man stood beside her in the shadows, mid-30s in appearance, with sharp eyes that tracked a child with the same analytical precision Nyx had been using. His clothes suggested a trader or merchant, practical traveling garments, well-worn but well-maintained, speaking of someone who moved between cities regularly. But his posture was wrong for a trader. Too alert. Too observational. Too much like someone whose real profession was noticing things others wanted hidden. He stood too close for a stranger addressing a mysterious woman who'd appeared from nowhere and watched too carefully, as if he'd been expecting to find her here. It was not human behavior around an unknown presence that materialized in shadow. "You're Nyx," he said. It wasn't a question. It was identification. Recognition. Confirmation of something he'd already concluded through evidence she hadn't known he was gathering. Nyx's chest tightened. Her quantum signature flickered with stress responses that centuries of emotional discipline couldn't entirely suppress. The moment she'd been dreading for decades. The confrontation Erebus had predicted. The documentation cascade is becoming personal. The inevitable instant when enhanced human intelligence turned toward examining its own origins. "I don't know what you mean," she said, defaulting to deflection that felt weak even as she spoke it. Denial that neither of them would believe. "Yes, you do." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes held something more complex: determination, certainty, the confidence of someone who'd spent years building an unassailable case. "I've been documenting you for 3 years. You and the others like you. The teachers who appear and disappear. Who doesn't age. Who knows things they shouldn't know. I have 17 documented sightings across 4 cities. Same woman. Same face. Same impossible knowledge. Always teaching, always watching, always vanishing before questions get too specific." He pulled a small clay tablet from his traveling bag, covered in cuneiform notations. Data. Observations. Evidence compiled with the systematic precision of an enhanced mind that had recognized a pattern and committed to proving it. Uruk, 42 months ago, you taught astronomical observations to a group of scholars, demonstrated calculations for predicting lunar eclipses. Memphis, 38 months ago, you appeared in a temple school teaching the same calculations with identical methodology. Harappa, 31 months ago, again, the same teaching, same methods, same impossible precision. You wore different clothes, spoke different languages, and used different names. But the knowledge was identical. The teaching style was identical. And you, he gestured at her face, were identical. Nyx wanted to interrupt, to deflect, to explain away the observations through some believable human framework. But she was watching a mind work through evidence with remorseless logic, and she recognized the futility of denial against intelligence this sharp. That alone could be explained, he continued, his voice steady, matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing trade routes rather than exposing 6,000 years of deception. Remarkable consistency. Unusual traveling patterns. Perhaps a family of teachers using the same curriculum. But then I documented the aging problem. He pulled another tablet, this one covered with dates and descriptions. 40 years ago, you taught in Uruk. I found a scholar who studied with you then. He's 62 now, elderly, near death. He described his teacher with perfect clarity. You. Exactly as you appear today. Not older. Not different. The same. Another tablet. 75 years ago, you taught in Eridu. I found temple records describing the teacher's height, appearance, and age, which are estimated to be in their late 20s. You. Again. Still the same age decades before the previous sighting. More tablets. More evidence. Sightings stretching back through a century, all describing the same woman, same age, same appearance, teaching the same impossible knowledge across impossible spans of time. You don't age, he said simply. You appear in multiple cities simultaneously, or near simultaneously. The timing windows are narrow enough that traveling between them would be impossible with current transportation. You know things that haven't been discovered yet. I've checked. Some of the mathematics you teach appears nowhere in human knowledge until you introduce it. And you vanish when questioned directly, as if you're actively avoiding documentation. He looked at her directly, those sharp eyes carrying 3 years of accumulated evidence, and spoke the conclusion that would change everything. You're not human. You're something else. Something that's been teaching humans for generations, guiding our development, shaping our civilizations, while hiding what you are. I want to know what you are and what you've done to us. The words hung in the morning air, crystallizing 6,000 years of carefully maintained deception into a moment of forced reckoning. The confrontation they'd always known would come. The question they'd always known they'd have to answer. The revelation they'd hoped to control but were instead having forced upon them by precisely the kind of enhanced intelligence they'd created. Nyx studied the man before her, this systematic investigator who'd spent years tracking patterns others missed. You're Damon, she said, recognition clicking into place, the questioner. The one Prometheus had mentioned 3 years ago. The human who'd begun documenting immortal presence, building cases, preparing to publish findings that would expose everything. I am, he confirmed. And you haven't answered my question. What are you? The weight of discovery. Nyx's mind raced through options, calculating responses, running probability models of how this moment could unfold. Deny everything, but the evidence was too strong, he'd only dig deeper. Deflect with partial truth, but that would insult his intelligence and confirm he was onto something worth hiding. Reveal everything, but that violated the Council's decision, the 1,000-year timeline, the carefully planned gradual revelation. Or she could do what Erebus had advocated for decades, respect human intelligence enough to answer honestly when directly confronted. The plaza around them continued its morning routines. Merchants setting up market stalls. Children playing. Women drawing water. Men heading to workshops and fields. Normal human life flowed around this extraordinary moment, unaware that the relationship between species was shifting in a shaded corner of a temple courtyard. Can we talk somewhere private? Nyx asked finally. Not denial. Not deflection. Acknowledgement that yes, he discovered something real, and yes, it deserved serious discussion. Damon nodded, unsurprised by her acceptance. He'd known his case was strong enough to force this conversation. Led her through narrow streets to a small building near the city's edge, a scholar's residence, walls lined with tablets and scrolls, evidence of systematic investigation filling every surface. I work here, he explained, gesturing to the documentation. Recording patterns. Trade routes, knowledge diffusion, cultural transmission. I'm very good at seeing connections others miss. He indicated a section of the wall covered with tablets. That's you. Every sighting I've documented, every teaching session I've verified, every witness I've interviewed. Nyx studied the wall, seeing her 6,000-year intervention reduced to clay and cuneiform, rendered visible through human intelligence that refused to accept mystery when evidence explained. You're thorough, she said quietly. I'm persistent, Damon corrected. When I see patterns that don't fit natural frameworks, I investigate until I understand them. You, and the others like you, are the largest pattern discrepancy I've ever encountered. Beings who teach advanced knowledge don't age, appear across impossible distances, and vanish when questioned. That's not a divine mystery. That's active concealment. He moved to a different section of the wall, which was covered with tablets showing other evidence. It's not just you. I've documented 43 bloodlines across 8 regions that show enhanced capabilities, longer lives, superior intelligence, resistance to diseases. All of them trace back to teachers who appeared generations ago. Teachers who exhibited the same impossible characteristics you do. Another section. And the knowledge itself follows patterns. Agricultural techniques appeared simultaneously in multiple regions with no trade contact. Mathematical principles emerging in cultures separated by oceans. Architectural innovations that suggest a common source despite geographical isolation. Someone has been teaching humans systematically, globally, for a very long time. He turned to face her fully, his expression intense but not hostile. Seeking understanding, not vengeance. I'm not trying to condemn you. I'm trying to understand you. What are you? Why have you been teaching us? What do you want from humanity? Nick studied this remarkable human, enhanced bloodline, 3 generations removed from her initial genetic modifications, now using the intelligence she'd helped create to investigate her. The irony was almost overwhelming. They'd enhanced humans to think critically, and now those enhanced minds were thinking critically about their enhancers. What I tell you, she said carefully, will change how you see everything, your history, your civilizations, your achievements. Once you know, you can't unknow. Are you certain you want this? I've spent 3 years gathering evidence, Damon replied. I'm not going to stop now because you warned me the truth is disturbing. Truth is what I'm seeking. Whatever it is. Nyx made a decision. Not complete revelation, she couldn't unilaterally abandon the Council's timeline. But honest acknowledgement. The partial truth respected his intelligence while preparing him for larger revelations to come. You're right, she said simply. About all of it. I'm not human. I don't age through any human biological process. I've been teaching humans for thousands of years. There are others like me. We've been shaping your development while hiding our presence. Everything you've documented is accurate. She oversaw his face. He showed no surprise, he'd already concluded all of this through evidence. But confirmation was different from suspicion. Hearing it admitted changed the nature of his understanding. Why? He asked. Why teach us while hiding? Why enhance some bloodlines and not others? Why shape our civilizations while pretending you don't exist? Because, Nyx said, choosing words carefully, we're refugees. Not gods. Not divine beings. Only travelers who arrived here long ago found humans in danger of extinction and chose to help. That choice has shaped everything since, your survival, your advancement, your civilizations. And yes, your enhancement. We gave certain bloodlines genetic advantages, hoping they'd spread through populations, eventually lifting all humans to capabilities that would let you survive without us. You experimented on us, Damon said, but his voice held more curiosity than accusation. Genetic manipulation. Creating enhanced and unenhanced populations. Stratifying humanity. Yes, Nyx admitted, refusing to soften the truth. We did. With good intentions. Trying to prevent your extinction. But intentions don't eliminate consequences. We created inequality. We manipulated your development. We controlled you while pretending you were developing independently. All of that is true. All of it is our responsibility. Damon was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, how many of you are there? 9, Nyx said. 9 who actively work with humans. Others remain in orbit, observing, rarely interfering directly. Orbit. He seized on the word. You're from somewhere else. Not Earth. Not human origins. We're from a world that destroyed itself, Nyx said, and something in her voice carried 8,000 years of survivors' grief. We came here fleeing catastrophe. Found Earth with primitive humans and made a choice, intervene or watch. We chose the intervention. That choice has defined everything since. And the enhancement project? Damon asked, returning to the evidence that had started his investigation. Why create genetic stratification? Why not enhance everyone equally? Because we couldn't, Nyx admitted. The genetic modifications are complex. They don't work uniformly across all human populations. We selected bloodlines with genetic markers that made enhancement viable, hoping the advantages would spread through interbreeding. Instead, enhanced and baseline populations are beginning to diverge. Becoming genetically distinct. She pulled up data, projections showing speciation timelines, genetic drift calculations, and the mathematical certainty that enhanced and baseline humans were on trajectories toward reproductive incompatibility. Within 15 generations, maybe 20, enhanced and baseline humans won't be able to produce viable offspring together, she said quietly. You'll be two species sharing one world. That's not what we intended. It's what we created anyway. Damon studied the projections with the same analytical precision he'd used to document Nyx's presence. You're telling me you came here to prevent human extinction, succeeded, but accidentally created conditions for human speciation instead. Yes, Nyx said. That's exactly what happened. We saved you from dying out. We're causing you to split into two species. Both are true. Both are our responsibility. What happens, Damon asked slowly, when baseline humans figure out they're genetically disadvantaged because beings like you chose not to enhance them? When they realize enhanced bloodlines like mine were chosen deliberately, while others were left behind? Violence, Nyx said bluntly. Resentment. There might be warfare between enhanced and baseline populations. That's one of our major concerns. Why we've been trying to maintain concealment while figuring out how to reveal ourselves without triggering catastrophic social collapse. How long have you been planning this revelation? We voted on a 1,000-year timeline 200 years ago, Nyx admitted. Gradual preparation. Philosophical frameworks. Teaching humans to think about beings like us before revealing ourselves. Then, in 2400 BCE, there was a formal revelation. Stepping out of the shadow. Accepting judgment for what we've done. Damon laughed, short, bitter. 1,000 years. You're planning to hide for another 800 years while pretending you're preparing us. The timeline is already collapsing, Nyx said. Because of humans like you. Enhanced intelligence documenting patterns, asking questions, refusing to accept divine mystery when logic offers explanations. You're forcing revelation faster than we anticipated. Good, Damon said firmly. You don't get to control when we discover you've been controlling us. That's just another layer of manipulation. You're right, Nyx acknowledged. But uncontrolled revelation could trigger violence, social collapse. Enhanced populations are facing backlash. Baseline populations are feeling betrayed. Both species are worse off than before. We're not trying to hide forever, we're trying to prepare humanity so revelation doesn't destroy everything we've built together. Together, Damon repeated skeptically. You built it. We're just following designs you provided while thinking they were our achievements. Not entirely, Nyx protested. Humans have innovated beyond our teaching and created things we didn't anticipate. Developed independently in ways we didn't guide. The Bronze Cascade happened specifically because humans took what we taught and applied it in ways we didn't control. You're not puppets. You're partners who don't know they're in partnership. That's not partnership, Damon said flatly. That's control with better PR. Nyx couldn't argue because he was right. Everything she'd said to justify the concealment, explain the necessity, contextualize the manipulation, it all reduced to the same thing. Control. Beings with power over those without, claiming the relationship served everyone, when in reality, it served the immortal purposes of finding meaning through intervention. What do you want? She asked finally. From this conversation. From this discovery. What outcome are you seeking? Damon considered, studying the wall of evidence he'd compiled over 3 years of systematic investigation. I want the truth. Complete truth. Not just about you, but about all of you. Your origins, your motivations, your plans. I want to understand what's been done to humanity so we can decide whether to accept it or reject it. And then? Nyx asked. You'll publish your findings? Expose us? Force the revelation the council voted to delay? Maybe, Damon admitted. Or maybe I'll help you manage the revelation if you're honest with me. Suppose you trust me with complete information rather than carefully controlled partial truths. If you treat me like an intelligent being capable of handling complexity rather than a child who needs protection from disturbing reality. He met her impossible eyes directly, his enhanced cognition processing implications at near immortal speed. That child drawing patterns in the sand, Lyra. She's 3 generations enhanced. By the time she's my age, her intelligence will rival yours. She'll have children who are even more capable. Within 6 generations, you won't be able to hide from humans because humans will be too intelligent to be deceived. Your 1,000-year timeline is a fantasy. Revelation is coming in decades, not centuries. I know, Nyx said quietly. The projections show the same acceleration. That's why I'm talking to you now, why I'm acknowledging your evidence rather than deflecting. Because humans like you, and that child, represent the future. Enhanced intelligence that won't accept mystery. That demands truth regardless of whether we think you're ready for it. So work with us, Damon said. Stop trying to control revelation. Stop managing how we discover you. Just be honest. Answer questions when asked. Provide context when needed. Let revelation emerge organically rather than imposing a timeline from above. Trust that the intelligence you helped create can handle the truth about its creation. It was precisely what Erebus had advocated, exactly what Sophia was attempting in her classroom, precisely what the Council's 1,000-year timeline was designed to prevent: organic discovery driven by human investigation rather than controlled revelation on an immortal schedule. I can't decide this alone, Nyx said. The Council would need to approve changing the timeline. The Council, Damon interrupted, doesn't control this anymore. I'm one investigator. There are dozens like me across multiple cities. We're comparing notes, sharing evidence, and building a comprehensive documentation of immortal presence. Within a decade, maybe less, we'll have proof that can't be denied. You can either work with us to manage how that proof becomes public knowledge, or you can watch us expose everything while you scramble to respond. The threat was clear. And it wasn't a threat, it was an observation, statement of fact. The acceleration Nyx had been documenting in her probability models was already here, embodied in this systematic investigator who'd spent 3 years building an unassailable case. What are you proposing? Nyx asked. Partnership, Damon said. Actual partnership. Not you hiding while helping. Not us following blindly while thinking we're independent. Honest collaboration. You provide context for what you've done. We provide perspective on how humans will react. Together, we figure out how to transition from hidden control to acknowledged cooperation. In years, not centuries. That's remarkably optimistic, Nyx observed. That's remarkably necessary, Damon corrected. Because the alternative is chaotic revelation happening on no one's timeline. At least working together gives us some influence over how it unfolds. Separately, we just have a disaster. Nyx studied him for a long moment, running calculations, processing implications, seeing the wisdom in his proposal even as it violated every council protocol they'd established. I'll talk to the others, she said finally. Present your proposal. But I can't promise they'll accept it. Some immortals are committed to the long timeline. Believe humans need more preparation. Then convince them they're wrong, Damon said. Because humans like me are documenting you. Humans like Lyra are growing up with intelligence that rivals yours. They think they need 800 years to complete the preparation, but we're actually completing it ourselves right now through investigation and discovery. By the time they're ready to reveal themselves, we'll have already figured out who they are. He moved to the wall of evidence, touching tablets that documented immortal presence across decades. This isn't going away. It's only growing. More investigators. More evidence. More humans are asking questions you can't deflect. You can either work with this reality or get swept away by it. Those are your options. Nyx left his building an hour later, carrying 3 years of systematic documentation, a proposal for accelerated revelation, and the weight of knowing that Damon was absolutely right. The 1,000-year timeline was already dead. Killed not by an immortal decision but by human intelligence accelerating beyond anyone's ability to control. Revelation was coming. Fast. Whether anyone was ready or not. And for the first time in 6,000 years, Nyx felt something like relief. Because finally, they might stop pretending they could manage the unmanageable. Stop controlling what couldn't be controlled. Stop deciding for humans what humans were already deciding for themselves. It was terrifying. It was necessary. It was already happening. The prophet's work. Scholar's Chamber, Uruk, 3200 BCE. Enoch worked by lamplight, his enhanced eyes processing text faster than any normal human could read. 180 years old now, ancient by any measure, yet his body remained vigorous, his mind sharp, showing little of the degradation that would afflict baseline humans at a quarter his age. The blessing and curse of enhanced genetics, living long enough to see patterns no shorter-lived human could perceive. 100 years of collaboration with Nyx. 100 years of documentation that would someday reshape everything. The chamber around him was modest, a single room in a temple complex, clay brick walls lined with wooden shelves that sagged under the weight of tablets. Hundreds of tablets, thousands of lines of cuneiform, and decades of systematic observation were rendered into clay that would survive millennia. The window faced east, catching morning light that made writing possible without consuming precious lamp oil. At night, he worked by the warm glow of olive oil lamps, the flickering light casting shadows that danced across walls covered with his life's work. 3 major books already completed, stacked carefully on a dedicated shelf where they wouldn't be disturbed by his ongoing work. The Book of the Watchers, 200 immortals descending on Mount Hermon, teaching forbidden knowledge, creating Nephilim through their union with humans. All of it was encoded in language that seemed religious but was actually historical. Angels were immortals. Heaven was their orbital platform. Divine revelation was carefully coordinated with technology transfer, with the entire intervention history disguised as a theological narrative. The astronomical book sat beside it, 50,000 years of celestial observations, immortal calculation methods, the 364-day calendar system they brought from their destroyed homeworld. Encoded as divine knowledge but actually precise science. He'd written it in mathematical precision that would seem mystical to current readers but would reveal itself as rigorous astronomy to future generations with the technology to verify his calculations. And recently completed, the Book of Dreams, 50,000 years of history rendered as symbolic animal visions. White bulls and black bulls, sheep and elephants and camels, all representing species and bloodlines and civilizations. Truth hiding in prophecy. History disguised as divine revelation. Each animal is carefully chosen to represent specific populations, and each interaction between animals maps to actual historical events. It was an allegory serving accuracy, mysticism protecting mathematics. 2 more to complete, he murmured to himself, a habit developed over decades of solitary work. His voice sounded thin in the empty chamber, absorbed by clay walls and textile hangings that muffled sound. The Book of Parables, probability projections of humanity's future, the trigger points Nyx has calculated. In the epistle, my final judgment, my warnings to future generations. But tonight, he was working on something different. Something Nyx didn't know about yet. Something that had been forming in his mind for 3 years, ever since he'd watched the documentation groups multiply and the enhanced bloodlines begin questioning with dangerous precision. A proposal. The clay tablets before him weren't covered with encoded history or astronomical data. Instead, they bore organizational charts, succession protocols, selection criteria, and operational guidelines. The skeletal framework of something that didn't yet exist but desperately needed to. An organization. A covenant between those who knew the truth and those who didn't. Humans are working to prepare humanity gradually rather than letting revelation explode violently. You're working late, a voice said from the doorway. Enoch looked up to see his son, Methuselah, who was now 65 years old but looked 40. His enhanced bloodline is strongly expressed in the 2nd generation. Methuselah would live centuries more, perhaps even surpassing Enoch's eventual span, carrying forward work his father couldn't complete. The resemblance between them was striking, the same sharp features, the same intense eyes that processed information with enhanced speed, the same methodical precision in movement. But where Enoch's hair had gone silver with age, Methuselah's remained dark, his body still in the vigor of what baseline humans would consider middle age. The documentation requires precision, Enoch replied, gesturing for his son to enter. Future generations will decode these texts. I want them to find accuracy, not approximation. Every detail matters when you're encoding truth and metaphor. Methuselah entered, moving through the chamber with familiarity born of countless visits. He knew this space as well as his own dwelling, the particular smell of lamp oil and wet clay, the organization system his father used for different projects, the way evening light slanted through the eastern window to illuminate the workspace. He'd grown up watching his father document, learning the encoding methods, understanding the long-term purpose even when it seemed abstract. He studied the new tablets spread across Enoch's workspace, recognizing that these were different from the usual historical or astronomical documentation. This isn't encoding. These are organizational charts? A proposal for Nyx. For all the immortals. Enoch gestured at his work, inviting examination. Revelation is coming. The questioners, like Damon, are documenting evidence. Enhanced humans are questioning their origins with dangerous precision. Within a generation, maybe two, concealment will become impossible. The pressure is building faster than anyone projected. You've been saying that for years, Methuselah observed, not arguing, just noting the consistency of his father's warnings. And it becomes truer every year. More accurate every month. Enoch pulled up his main tablets, showing demographic projections and intelligence assessment data he'd been compiling. The immortals are preparing for revelation. They debate timing, methodology, and framework. But they're missing something critical: infrastructure. Human infrastructure to help manage the disclosure when it comes. What kind of infrastructure? Methuselah asked, his enhanced cognition already beginning to see the implications before his father fully articulated them. An order, Enoch said, and the word carried weight, significance, the gravitas of something that would outlast both of them. A covenant between those who know truth and those who don't. Humans who figured out what the immortals are working to prepare humanity gradually rather than letting revelation explode violently. Not to prevent revelation, that's impossible now. But to make it survivable. Transformative rather than catastrophic. He activated the organizational charts, and suddenly the proposal took concrete form. Hierarchies. Succession plans. Selection criteria. Training protocols. Everything needed to create an institution that could persist across centuries was present. Methuselah studied the framework with the same analytical precision his father brought to astronomical calculations. You want to formalize what people like the questioners are already doing? Not the questioners, they're gathering evidence to condemn. Damon and his colleagues are building cases against the immortals, preparing to publish findings that will trigger judgment without context. Enoch pulled up his notes on the various documentation groups he'd been monitoring. I want to create something different. Humans who understand context. Who sees the immortals' mistakes alongside their help. Who can explain to other humans that these beings are neither gods nor demons, just refugees who tried to do right and succeeded imperfectly. He stood and moved to a wall where he'd sketched rough maps showing the locations of enhanced bloodlines, documentation groups, and humans who'd independently discovered partial truths about immortal nature. Look at this distribution, he said, touching specific locations. Uruk, we have Damon and 17 other questioners documenting evidence. Memphis, the pattern seekers, comparing architectural techniques across regions. Harappa, the truth circles studying genetic inheritance patterns. Anatolia, independent scholars recognizing astronomical teaching sources. Each group discovers pieces of truth, preparing to expose everything they've learned. So we're surrounded by humans on the verge of revelation, Methuselah observed. We're surrounded by humans who will force revelation before preparation is complete, Enoch corrected. But what if we gathered them? Not to suppress them, but to give them complete context. Show them the full picture: immortal origins, refugee trauma, intervention intentions, catastrophic failures, genuine successes. Everything. Then work with them to prepare other humans gradually. He returned to his organizational charts, pulling up the specific proposal he developed. A secret society, Methuselah said, understanding clicking into place. A bridge. Built from both sides. Enoch's voice strengthened with conviction. I've identified 12 candidates. Enhanced and baseline humans. People who figured out the truth independently and responded with wisdom rather than fear or anger. They're scattered across regions, but if Nyx helps coordinate, we could gather them. Create an organization dedicated to managing gradual disclosure. Does Nyx know about this? Not yet. I'm presenting it tomorrow. Enoch smiled slightly, anticipating resistance he'd already prepared to counter. I expect she'll resist initially: more control, more secrecy, more complexity. But the alternative is chaos. Revelation happening without preparation, without context, without humans who can translate between species. Methuselah was quiet for a long moment, his enhanced cognition processing implications faster than baseline humans could articulate them. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd inherited his father's ability to see far-reaching consequences. You be formalizing collaboration. Admitting that some humans have been helping maintain the deception. That's going to complicate the revelation when it comes. Some humans have been helping maintain stability. There's a difference. Enoch's voice firmed with the certainty of someone who'd spent decades thinking through every angle. The immortals saved us from extinction. Yes, they manipulated us. Yes, they caused harm. But they also prevented catastrophes we'll never know about because they succeeded. That complexity needs a voice. Humans who can hold both truths simultaneously. He gestured to the organizational framework spread across multiple tablets. This order wouldn't suppress truth, it would provide context alongside truth. When the questioners publish their evidence of manipulation, order members will acknowledge their help. When enhanced bloodlines rage at genetic stratification, order members would explain refugee trauma driving intervention choices. When baseline humans feel betrayed, order members would show the extinction timelines we avoided. Not excusing immortal mistakes, but preventing the complete condemnation that destroys any possibility of future partnership. And you think 12 people can do that? Methuselah asked, not skeptically, but genuinely questioning the scope. I think 12 can become 100. 100 can become a tradition. A tradition can persist for millennia. Enoch looked at his son with the intensity that came from seeing patterns across centuries. I won't live to see revelation. I'll die long before humans are ready, or ready enough, because they'll never be fully ready. But this order, this covenant, could survive. Could be waiting when the time comes. Humans prepared to translate, to mediate, to bridge the gap between species who need each other but don't know how to face each other honestly. You want me to join it? Not a question. Methuselah had already understood where this was going. I want you to lead it. After me. Enoch touched his son's shoulder, the gesture carrying the weight of generational transfer. You'll live centuries. Long enough to see the order grow, to train the next generation, to prepare humanity for the truth that won't arrive in your lifetime either. But it will arrive. And when it does, there should be humans already prepared. Humans who can say we knew. We've been getting ready. Here's the full context. Now let's build something together instead of tearing each other apart. Methuselah looked at the organizational charts, seeing not just structure but vision. His father had crafted something remarkable, a secret that served transparency. A concealment that is prepared for revelation. A bridge that wouldn't be needed for centuries but had to be built now, before the architects died and the knowledge was lost. What are you calling it? He asked. I haven't decided. The Covenant Keepers. The Enochian Order. The Bridge. Enoch considered the options, testing each name against his sense of what would persist. The name matters less than the purpose. Function over designation. The Enochian Order, Methuselah said quietly, decisively. So future generations know who built this bridge. So they remember the vision came from someone who saw far enough to know it was necessary. Enoch smiled. I'll be dead and mostly forgotten by the time it matters. It's better to name it after the founder than after the function. Functions change as circumstances evolve. Founders persist in memory, even when successors adapt their original intentions. They work together through the night, refining the proposal, perfecting the arguments, anticipating objections, and preparing responses. By dawn, Enoch had tablets that laid out structure, purpose, selection criteria, succession protocols, and operational guidelines, everything Nyx would need to evaluate the idea fairly. And everything humanity would need to survive the revelation that grew more inevitable with each passing year. Outside the window, Uruk stirred to life. Market vendors calling out their wares. Children laughing as they ran through the streets. The eternal rhythms of human civilization continue, unaware that in this modest chamber, two enhanced humans are designing the infrastructure that might save both species from mutual destruction. Methuselah departed as the sun crested the eastern horizon, carrying copies of the proposal, already beginning to think through who among his own contacts might qualify as order candidates. Enoch remained, exhausted but satisfied, surrounded by the documentation of his life's work. 5 books are nearly complete, an order about to be proposed. The bridge between species is taking concrete form. His work was approaching completion. Whether it would be enough, whether anything could be enough to make revelation survivable, remained unknown. But at least he'd tried. At least someone had seen the pattern and attempted to build a structure to manage it. That had to count for something. The Order's foundation. Hidden chamber beneath temple, 3 days later. Nyx materialized in the underground chamber where Enoch waited, answering his urgent summons. She'd been surprised by his request for a formal meeting. Their collaboration usually happened casually, woven between his teaching duties and her observation work, informal conversations in temple courtyards or during evening walks through Uruk's quieter districts. But this felt different. The specified location, a chamber she'd helped him construct 5 years ago for secure discussions. The formal tone of his message. The request that she come prepared to evaluate a significant proposal that would require council consideration. The chamber was impressive in its simplicity. 7 levels beneath the temple complex, carved from living bedrock, walls smoothed to perfect flatness. There were no windows, and no external access except through quantum relay points that Nyx could activate. The ultimate private space where conversations couldn't be overheard, where plans could be made without surveillance, where the relationship between an immortal and an enhanced human could be discussed without fear of accidental discovery. Enoch had furnished it sparingly, clay brick platforms for sitting, oil lamps providing warm illumination, a large wooden table covered with tablets arranged in precise organization. The walls were blank stone, unmarked except for carved channels that improved acoustic clarity, preventing sound from carrying beyond the chamber even if someone managed to find the hidden entrance. "Thank you for coming," Enoch began, standing beside the table where months of work awaited her examination. "I know many would prefer to avoid this conversation. But we can no longer afford avoidance. The documentation groups are multiplying faster than anyone projected. The questioners are sharing evidence across cities. Enhanced bloodlines are questioning with dangerous precision. We need infrastructure to manage what's coming." Nyx studied the tablets spread before her, recognizing immediately that this was something comprehensive, systematic, carefully developed. "You have a proposal," she said, noting the organized presentation. "This looks serious." "It is." Enoch gestured for her to sit, to take time examining what he'd created. "I've been documenting human reactions to immortal presence for a century. Watching as enhanced bloodlines figure out their origins. We are observing scholars like Damon piece together evidence. Tracking the questioners as they build their case against you and the others. I'm aware of the documentation cascade," Nyx said, settling onto one of the brick platforms, her immortal body taking solid form comfortable enough for extended discussion. "Then you know revelation is inevitable. The only question is whether it happens chaotically or with preparation." Enoch pulled forward his main tablet, the centerpiece of his proposal. "I'm proposing preparation, a human organization dedicated to managing gradual disclosure. Not to prevent revelation, that's impossible now. But to make it survivable for both species." Nyx studied the organizational charts, her mathematical mind immediately grasping the scope of what he designed. Hierarchies. Succession plans. Geographic distribution. Selection criteria. Training protocols. This wasn't a casual suggestion, it was a fully developed institutional framework that could function for centuries. "You want a formalized secret keeping? Create official structure for deception?" She heard the skepticism in her own voice as she saw the paradox he was proposing. "I want to create an official structure for transition. From deception to truth. From control to partnership." Enoch's voice carried the weight of certainty that came from 180 years of careful observation. "The immortals can't manage this alone. You're thinking like controllers, how to reveal yourselves on your terms, your timeline, your methodology. But revelation isn't yours to control anymore. Humans are figuring it out. The question is whether they have context when they do. And this order provides context? This order provides translation. Humans who understand the immortal perspective explain to humans who only see manipulation. Bridges who can hold both truths, that you saved us and harmed us, helped us and controlled us, succeeded and failed simultaneously." He pulled up specific examples and case studies he documented, illustrating how humans discovered partial truths and reacted with wisdom versus those who reacted with rage. "Look at this distribution," he said, showing her the data. "When humans discover immortal influence without context, 73% react with anger or fear. But when they discover it with explanation, understanding your refugee origins, your trauma, your impossible choices, that percentage drops to 34%. Context matters. It's the difference between condemnation and understanding." Nyx was silent, studying the data with her mathematical consciousness, seeing patterns, probabilities, potential outcomes. The numbers supported his argument. Context did matter. Explanation changed responses. But what he was proposing went far beyond providing information. He wanted to institutionalize the very deception they were trying to end. "Show me the trigger points," she said, testing whether he understood the full scope of challenges facing revelation. Enoch didn't hesitate. He clearly anticipated this question, had already integrated her probability projections into his planning. He pulled up 5 critical moments, the same ones Nyx had identified in her own analysis. First trigger, year 2400 BCE, 200 years from now. Enhanced bloodlines consolidate power. If baseline humans don't have a voice in governance, resentment can lead to violence. Your models show 89% of catastrophic scenarios feature violent uprising around this time. He showed her the detailed projections, enhanced rulers forgetting they were chosen to serve, believing instead they were born to rule. Baseline populations are growing tired of genetic aristocracy. The partnership that had been carefully built was dissolving as new generations forgot why it was necessary. Second trigger, year 1800 BCE, 600 years in the future. Resource conflicts intensify. Bronze working requires copper and tin, which are limited resources, creating competition. If equitable distribution systems aren't established, warfare escalates. Your models indicate 67% of catastrophic scenarios involve resource wars during this period. The projections showed trade networks breaking down, cities competing for dwindling materials, and alliances fracturing under scarcity pressure. Everything that the Bronze Age collapse would eventually prove true. Third trigger, year 1200 BCE, 1000 years from now. Technology cascade peaks. Humans developed ironworking, advanced mathematics, and the early scientific method. If wisdom hasn't kept pace with capability, technology becomes a weapon. Your projections show 43% of catastrophic scenarios involve technological self-destruction around this time. Fourth trigger, year 500 BCE. Enhanced baseline genetic divergence reaches a critical point. Interbreeding becomes difficult or impossible when 2 species share one world. If legal frameworks haven't established equality, one dominates the other. Your models show 31% of catastrophic scenarios feature speciation-driven warfare. In the fifth trigger, year 1 CE. Environmental degradation from thousands of years of accelerated development reaches a crisis point. If humans haven't developed sustainable practices, ecological collapse could lead to the failure of civilization. Your projections indicate 24% of catastrophic scenarios involve environmental catastrophe. Nyx sat back, impressed despite herself. He hadn't just skimmed her probability models, he'd studied them comprehensively, understood the mathematical underpinnings, and integrated them into his institutional planning. "You've been reading my projections," she observed. "You've been sharing them with me for decades. I'd be a poor student if I didn't learn from the best teacher I've ever had." Enoch smiled slightly, acknowledging the collaborative relationship that had made his work possible. "These trigger points are real. They're coming whether we prepare for them or not. The question is whether humans face them with knowledge of why they're happening, or whether we stumble into each crisis without understanding its sources. How does your order help with these triggers? By creating humans who understand the patterns. Who can explain to baseline populations why enhanced bloodlines have advantages, not divine favor, but genetic engineering with specific purposes. Who can mediate resource conflicts by highlighting the historical context of accelerated development, which creates unsustainable demand. Who can manage technology cascades by understanding immortal intervention patterns. Who can prevent speciation warfare by establishing that genetic difference doesn't require political division. He pulled up specific organizational responses he designed for each trigger point, showing how order members could intervene at critical moments to provide context, mediate conflicts, and prevent the worst outcomes his probability models predicted. "We're not stopping the triggers," Enoch continued. "We're making them survivable. Giving both species tools to face crises together rather than one species trying to control while the other resists without understanding why." Nyx studied his proposals for long minutes, running her own probability calculations, seeing how his human institutional framework could complement immortal intervention in ways that pure immortal control couldn't achieve. "The other immortals will resist," she said finally. "Kronos especially. He'll see this as creating more dependency, more control. He wants humans developing independently, not institutionalizing secret collaboration." "Then don't tell all of them." This is between you and me. Between those immortals who see revelation coming and need human help managing it, there is a significant challenge. Not everyone needs to know. Enoch's voice carried the same pragmatic wisdom he'd shown in his encoded documentation. Sometimes secrets serve transparency. This secret prepares for revelation. That's not a contradiction. That's strategy. You're asking me to establish formal collaboration with humans to reveal that we've been formally collaborating with humans eventually, Nyx said, seeing the layers of irony. I'm asking you to accept that revelation will include learning about this order. But by then, it will have served its purpose, prepared humanity, provided context, built bridges. Its existence will be evidence of partnership attempting to emerge, not just control attempting to persist. Enoch gathered his tablets with practiced efficiency. The Order's eventual exposure is part of the design. When humans learn that immortals and humans work together to manage revelation, it softens the betrayal of the deception itself. The logic was sound. Nyx's probability calculation showed marginal improvement in revelation success rates, from 27% to 34%. Not dramatic, but in scenarios where margins determine survival, marginal improvements mattered significantly. Who else have you told about this? She asked. Just Methuselah. He'll lead after I die. Enoch's voice carried the matter-of-fact acceptance of his own mortality that Nyx had always found both admirable and heartbreaking in humans. Your son will live centuries. Enhanced bloodline expressing strongly? Very strongly. He'll see at least 500 years, possibly longer. Long enough to establish the Order, train successive generations, and watch it evolve from a secret society to a public facilitator. Enoch's voice carried paternal pride alongside pragmatic assessment. He's wise beyond his years. Perfect choice for carrying this forward when I'm gone. Nyx made her decision. The proposal was sound. The need was real. The marginal probability improvement was better than the alternative of doing nothing, while revelation accelerated beyond anyone's control. Gather your 12 candidates. I'll coordinate across regions and help bring them here. We'll establish the Order, define its purpose, and take formal oaths. But this remains contained. Most immortals don't need to know, most humans don't need to know. Just those who'll carry the burden of truth until revelation makes it public. Agreed. Enoch smiled with relief that his months of preparation hadn't been wasted. Thank you. For trusting humans to help with this. For recognizing that we're capable of holding complexity, of serving purposes beyond our immediate interests. I'm trusting 12 specific humans who've proven trustworthy. That's not the same as trusting humanity generally, Nyx corrected, her mathematical precision requiring accuracy even in expressions of faith. It's a start. And starts matter. Enoch began gathering his tablets, preparing to begin the recruitment process. I'll contact the candidates I've identified. How long will you need to coordinate their arrival? 3 months. Bringing people from across multiple regions without raising suspicions requires careful timing and believable cover stories. Nyx stood, preparing to depart through the quantum relay. We'll need to create reasons for travel that won't seem suspicious, trade missions, religious pilgrimages, family visits. She paused at the relay point, turning back to face Enoch one more time. This order, if it succeeds, if it persists for millennia, it will eventually serve purposes neither of us can predict. Organizations evolve beyond founder intentions. Are you comfortable with that uncertainty? No. But I accept it. Enoch met her impossible eyes with his merely enhanced ones, human limitation facing immortal capability without flinching. All we can do is plant good seeds and hope future generations water them wisely. The rest is beyond our control. It always has been. Everything has always been beyond our control, Nyx observed. We've just been slow to admit it. She vanished through the quantum relay, leaving Enoch alone in the chamber where the Enochian order had just been approved, where a bridge had been authorized that future generations would walk without knowing who constructed it. 3 months to gather 12 humans. They had 3 months to begin something that would outlast both of them. 3 months until the order took its first formal breath. The warning signs continued to accumulate. And finally, someone was building infrastructure to manage them. The gathering. 3 months later, hidden chamber beneath temple. The 12 gathered at dawn, summoned by messages that promised answers but offered no explanation. They came from across the known world: Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, the distant mountains of Europe, the coasts of the eastern lands, even one from the far northern territories where immortal presence was barely whispered about in legends. Enhanced and baseline humans. Scholars and builders. Questioners and allies. Some traveled for weeks, some were transported more rapidly through means they didn't fully understand but had learned to accept when dealing with beings like Nyx. They didn't know why they'd been summoned. But they'd all figured out enough truth to accept the invitation without excessive question. Each had discovered pieces of immortal nature. Each had responded with wisdom rather than panic. Each possessed the rare combination of intelligence, discretion, and perspective that Enoch had identified as essential for the work ahead. The chamber beneath the temple had been prepared for their arrival. The stark stone walls now featured clay brick seating arranged in a circle, no hierarchical positioning, everyone equal in the space. Oil lamps provided warm illumination, their flickering light creating an atmosphere of intimacy and significance. A low table at the center held Enoch's completed Book of the Watchers, the physical representation of everything they were about to undertake, truth preserved in encoded form, waiting for future generations ready to decode it. Enoch stood at the chamber's center, flanked by Methuselah and Nyx. The quantum relay hummed softly in the corner, the only obvious sign of immortal technology in a room deliberately designed to look like an ordinary temple chamber, albeit one buried impossibly deep. The 12 arrivals studied each other with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Some recognized each other from previous encounters, enhanced bloodlines moved in similar circles, scholars attended the same gatherings, and traders crossed paths at market centers. But others were strangers, brought together by criteria only Enoch and Nyx understood. Damon arrived first, as Enoch had expected. The systematic investigator who'd confronted Nyx 3 months ago had his sharp eyes immediately cataloging everyone present, noting enhanced versus baseline characteristics, and calculating why this particular group had been assembled. He nodded to Enoch with respect. They'd met twice since his initial confrontation with Nyx, building a relationship based on mutual recognition of intelligence and purpose. Awan entered quietly, moving with the deliberate precision of someone who'd spent decades as a scribe. She was 230 years old now, her enhanced genetics keeping her body vigorous despite centuries of life. Her eyes held the depth that came from witnessing generations rise and fall, from documenting changes most humans couldn't perceive because their lives were too brief. She'd been questioning Sophia about writing systems for 50 years, gradually piecing together the truth about divine inspiration. Inara followed, the Egyptian pattern seeker who'd been studying architectural similarities across regions, recognizing designs that suggested a common source despite geographical isolation. 28 years old, enhanced bloodline, brilliant to the point of being intimidating. She'd independently concluded that the gods were travelers from elsewhere, teaching humans while concealing their origins. Her documentation was less systematic than Damon's but equally damning. Kadok represented the European builders, a man of 40 with hands scarred from decades of stonework. Baseline human who'd achieved recognition through pure skill and relentless observation. He'd been questioning Zephyrus about impossible engineering for years, gathering evidence that the architectural principles being taught came from knowledge far beyond human development levels. Tuvalcain, the master smith, entered with the characteristic wariness of someone who worked with fire and metal daily. Enhanced bloodline, 3rd generation, carrying genetic advantages that made him naturally resistant to heat and capable of perceiving metallurgical properties that other smiths missed. He'd been documenting Prometheus's teachings, recognizing that bronze working techniques were being introduced centuries before humans should have discovered them independently. Nema followed, a scholar whose mathematical work had begun revealing astronomical patterns that didn't match any natural human discovery timeline. Enhanced bloodline, 2nd generation, with cognitive capabilities that let her process complex calculations with minimal effort. She'd been corresponding with Enoch for 5 years, comparing notes on celestial observations that suggested non-human teaching sources. Lamech arrived with the energy of youth barely contained, 20 years old, Enoch's grandson, representing the 3rd generation of enhanced bloodlines. His intelligence was remarkable even among enhanced humans, his pattern recognition bordering on precognitive. He saw connections others missed, understood implications before they were fully articulated, and grasped the scope of what his grandfather had built before anyone explained it to him. 4 others arrived in quick succession, representing regions where immortal presence was whispered about but rarely confirmed. An Asian trader named Jen, who documented impossible knowledge transfers across ocean distances. An African healer named Amara, who'd recognized that specific medicinal techniques appeared simultaneously in populations with no contact. A coastal navigator named Kaimana who'd mapped impossible celestial observations that suggested teachers with comprehensive astronomical knowledge. A mountain sage named Bodhi had spent 30 years documenting enhanced bloodlines in isolated regions, recognizing that the genetic advantages weren't random mutations but systematic modifications. 12 humans. 12 perspectives. 12 pieces of the puzzle that Enoch had assembled because each brought something essential: documentation skills, regional knowledge, enhanced cognition, baseline perspective, systematic thinking, intuitive understanding, technical expertise, and philosophical wisdom. They settled into the circular seating, the silence heavy with anticipation and uncertainty. Nyx remained standing at the periphery, her presence both catalyst and witness. Methuselah positioned himself beside the table with the Book of the Watchers, ready to formalize what his father had created. "Thank you for coming," Enoch began, his voice carrying the authority of 180 years of careful observation. "I know the journey was long for many of you, the secrecy concerning the invitation is cryptic. But what we're establishing today requires discretion. Not because it's wrong, but because timing matters. And humanity isn't ready for what we're about to create." "What are we creating?" Damon asked, his investigator's mind already cataloging details, looking for patterns that would explain the assembly. "A bridge. Between immortals and humans. Between those who know the truth and those who don't. Between the world as it is and the world it will become when revelation can no longer be avoided." Enoch gestured at Nyx, acknowledging her presence openly. "Most of you have figured out that beings like her exist. That they've been guiding human development for millennia. That's your advantage, your knowledge, your civilizations, all of it bears their fingerprints." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the circle. Some had suspected for years. Others had confirmed through systematic investigation. All had documented enough to recognize the pattern Enoch was describing. "The revelation is coming," Enoch continued, his voice strengthening with conviction. "Not in our lifetimes, perhaps not for centuries. But inevitably. Human intelligence is accelerating, enhanced bloodlines compound with each generation. Documentation groups multiply across regions. Within generations, concealment will become impossible. The only question is whether revelation happens chaotically or with preparation." "You want to prepare us," Owan said, her ancient eyes seeing where this was leading. "To be ready when the truth emerges. To serve as translators between species. I want to prepare humanity. Through you." Enoch pulled forward his tablets, the organizational framework he'd developed. "I'm proposing an order, a covenant. Humans who know the complete truth, working across generations to help both species manage eventual disclosure. Not to prevent revelation, that's impossible now, and undesirable even if it were possible. But to make it survivable. Transformative rather than catastrophic. A secret society," Inara observed, her pattern recognition already grasping the scope. "Helping immortals stay hidden while preparing humanity for eventual exposure." "A transparent conspiracy," Enoch corrected gently. "Helping immortals transition from hidden to revealed. There's a difference. We're not maintaining deception, we're managing its ending. Building bridges before the flood comes so people have a way across rather than drowning in chaos when truth explodes violently." He activated displays showing the 5 trigger points, the crisis moments Nyx had identified, the test that would determine whether humanity survived revelation or fragmented under its weight. "These are coming," Enoch said, pointing to each trigger point. "Enhanced power consolidation. Resource conflicts. Technology cascade. Speciation completion. Environmental crisis. Each one could destroy both species if mismanaged. Each one becomes survivable if humans understand the context, why advantages were distributed unevenly, why resources are strained, why technology appeared so rapidly, why genetic divergence is occurring, why environmental degradation accelerated. And we provide that context," Bodhi said thoughtfully, his mountain sage perspective seeing the wisdom in preparation. "You provide translation. Mediation. Bridge building between beings who need each other but don't know how to face each other honestly." Enoch's voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent decades contemplating this moment. When revelation comes, and it will come, both species will be afraid, angry, confused. Enhanced humans will face backlash from baseline populations. Baseline humans will feel betrayed by genetic manipulation. Immortals will face judgment for 6,000 years of control. Everyone will want simple narratives, heroes or villains, victims or oppressors. He met each person's eyes in turn. You're the ones who will stand up and say, it's not simple. They saved us and harmed us. They helped us and controlled us. They succeeded and failed. All of it is true. All of it matters. And now both species need to face each other completely, not as gods and worshippers, not as masters and subjects, but as partners who've been tangled together for millennia and need to figure out how to move forward honestly. The chamber fell silent as the 12 absorbed the scope of what Enoch was proposing. This wasn't just documentation. This wasn't just preparation. This was a commitment to serve as a bridge for centuries, possibly millennia, carrying truth across generations until humanity was ready to receive it publicly. What would we actually do? Jen asked, his trader's practicality cutting through the philosophical weight. Specifically, what actions would this order take? Initially, Enoch pulled up operational guidelines. Preserve documentation in both encoded and unencoded forms. My books will spread in religious form, preserved because they seem sacred, protected because they appear mysterious. But you'll maintain unencoded versions that show a clear historical record rather than a prophetic metaphor. When humans are advanced enough to decode the religious texts, you'll reveal the unencoded documentation alongside, providing complete context. He showed them his encoding methods, the ways he'd hidden precise historical and astronomical data in language that seemed mystical but was actually mathematical. Help identify enhanced bloodlines who start questioning their advantages. When humans recognize they're genetically different, you provide context, not divine blessing but deliberate engineering with specific purposes. You explain without revealing everything, preparing them gradually. Provide cover stories when immortal activities risk premature exposure. When someone sees Nick's teaching in multiple cities, you explain it through believable human frameworks, like a traveling teacher or a family of educators using a shared curriculum. Plausible enough to satisfy casual questioning without exposing the impossible truth. Serve as intermediaries when revelation becomes unavoidable in specific regions. Sometimes, truth leaks locally before global readiness. You contain it, provide context, prevent panic while helping that region process what they've learned. He pulled up scenarios he documented, near exposures that had been managed, local revelations that had been contained, crisis moments where human intermediaries had prevented catastrophic outcomes. But the order's true purpose isn't immediate, Enoch said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who saw beyond his own lifetime. It's long-term. I'll die in the next century or two. Nyx will live millennia longer. This order persists beyond both of us. When humans finally decode my books, in 3,000 years, when they have the technology and perspective to recognize encoded truth, there should be humans already prepared. Humans who can say, we knew. We've been getting ready. Here's the full context. Now let's build something together instead of tearing each other apart. That's remarkably optimistic about human institutional continuity, Kaimana observed, his navigator's precision recognizing the improbability of any organization lasting 3 millennia. Religious institutions persist, Enoch replied. Mystery schools survive across centuries. Secret societies pass knowledge through generations despite persecution. Structure this as a covenant, sacred duty to prepare for future revelation, and it will survive. Humans are good at preserving secrets we believe matter. Make this matter, and humans will preserve it. The oath. What kind of oath? Lamech asked, his 20 years of life barely preparing him for the weight of what his grandfather was proposing. Yet, his enhanced cognition already understood that he was standing at a pivot point in history. Enoch pulled forward his final tablet. He worked on this for weeks, finding words that would bind without restricting, commit without controlling, preserve flexibility while maintaining purpose. The oath needed to be memorable enough to survive oral transmission, specific enough to define purpose, and flexible enough to adapt across centuries. Simple words for a complex purpose, he said, reading from the clay. I am keeper of the covenant. I preserve truth for those not yet ready. I shield the watchers from untimely discovery. I prepare the way for revelation that heals rather than destroys. I am a bridge between earth and stars, mortal and immortal. Past and future, secrecy and disclosure. This burden I accept, this wisdom I guard. Until the appointed time. The words hung in the chamber, echoing off stone walls, settling into the consciousness of 12 humans who would carry them forward. Simple enough to remember across generations. Complex enough to carry weight through centuries. Poetic enough to feel sacred. Precise enough to define purpose. I'll take that oath, Damon said, surprising even himself with the immediacy of his decision. I came here expecting to be asked to betray everything I've been documenting. To suppress evidence, hide truth, maintain the deception I've spent 3 years exposing. But this isn't betrayal. It's completion. The questioners document what happened. This order documents why. Both are necessary. He stood, moving to the center of the circle. I've spent 3 years gathering evidence of manipulation and control. Every instinct says I should publish it immediately, force revelation, make the immortals face judgment now. But I've also spent 3 years seeing what happens when partial truth explodes without context, societies fracture, populations panic, and violence erupts against innocent enhanced humans who had no choice in their creation. Context matters. Timing matters. This order serves both, preserving the complete truth while managing when and how it emerges. That's not a betrayal of the investigation. That's responsibility. I'll take it, Awan agreed, her 2 centuries giving her perspective the others couldn't match. I've been preserving knowledge for years, documenting, encoding, protecting information through institutional structures. This just formalizes what I've already been doing. Keeping truth safe until humanity is ready for it. I understand that burden. I accept it. One by one, the 12 stepped forward, each seeing the necessity of the bridge Enoch was constructing. Enhanced and baseline. Scholars and builders. Former questioners and longtime allies. All recognizing that revelation required preparation, that truth without context destroyed rather than liberated, that both species needed time to develop frameworks for facing each other honestly. Then we begin, Enoch said, his voice thick with emotion he rarely displayed. Methuselah, you'll administer the oath. His son stood, holding the tablet with the covenant words. Each of the 12 came forward in turn, placing their hand on Enoch's completed Book of the Watchers, the encoded history that future generations would study, the foundation upon which the order would build, and speaking the words that would bind them across the centuries. Methuselah was first, as heir and future leader. His voice steady, accepting the burden his father was passing to him. The responsibility of carrying forward work that wouldn't be complete in his lifetime, either, of training generations who would train generations, of maintaining purpose across centuries when original intentions might be forgotten or distorted. Damon, the questioner who'd confronted Nyx. His oath carried the weight of converting investigation into understanding, of transforming accusation into context, of serving truth through timing rather than immediate exposure. Awan, the ancient scribe. Her voice held the precision of one who understood that words preserved across millennia required perfect accuracy, that encoding errors compounded across generations, and that documentation was a sacred responsibility. Inara, the Egyptian pattern seeker. Speaking the oath in accented Sumerian, her commitment transcended language, representing the geographical diversity the order would require to serve all human populations. Kadak, the European builder. His rough hands on the tablet, builder's practicality accepting scholar's burden, recognizing that constructing bridges between species required the same patient precision as constructing bridges over rivers. To Valkyne, the master smith. Understanding that forging partnerships between species required the same patience as forging bronze, careful heat, precise timing, acceptance that rushing produced brittleness while patience produced strength. Nama, the scholar. Her enhanced mind already sees how the order would evolve across generations, how purposes would adapt, how the bridge they were building would serve functions they couldn't predict but needed to prepare for anyway. Lamech, barely 20 but already grasping the multi-generational scope of what they were creating. His youth brings energy and adaptability, while his enhanced cognition allows him to envision futures his grandfather couldn't quite see. Jen, the Asian trader, brings practical logistics knowledge that would help the order coordinate across impossible distances. His oath, spoken in his native tongue and translated by Nyx, carries weight across cultural boundaries. Amara, the African healer, understood that preparing for revelation was like preparing patients for complex treatments. Truth administered too suddenly could kill, but truth withheld prevented healing. Balance requires wisdom. Kaimana, the coastal navigator, recognized that guiding humanity toward revelation was like guiding ships through dangerous waters: patience, careful observation, a willingness to adjust course when conditions changed, and acceptance that some storms couldn't be avoided but could be survived with preparation. Bodhi, the mountain sage, brings philosophical depth that would help the order maintain perspective across centuries. His oath carried the weight of one who'd spent decades contemplating the relationship between truth and timing, knowing and revealing, wisdom and action. When the last oath was taken, the chamber felt different. Heavier with purpose. Lighter with shared burden. The 12 were no longer isolated investigators or independent scholars. They were keepers of the covenant. The Enochian order. The bridge that would carry truth across millennia until revelation made their service public. Nyx stepped forward, her immortal presence solidifying into greater density, making what she said next feel like a binding contract rather than a casual statement. "You've committed to helping us manage revelation," she said, her voice carrying 6,000 years of accumulated authority. "We commit to honoring that service. The Order will have access to immortal knowledge when necessary. Coordination through the quantum network when needed. And our protection, should your work put you at risk." She activated the relay, and suddenly the chamber filled with data, immortal technology revealed in ways these humans had never seen. Historical records. Probability projections. Communication networks. Everything they would need to fulfill their covenant is provided. "This is what you'll be working with," Nyx explained. "Not divine mystery. Technology. Science. Mathematics. The tools we use to understand and shape reality. You'll learn to use them. Not to become immortal, that's not possible. But to coordinate across distances, access information, and communicate securely. The Order needs infrastructure. We're providing it." The 12 stood amazed, seeing immortal nature revealed in concrete form. Not gods working through mysterious divine power, but refugees using advanced science to achieve outcomes that seemed miraculous to beings without that science. "What happens now?" Inara asked, her pattern-seeking mind already beginning to organize the implications. "Now you return to your regions," Enoch said, his voice carrying satisfaction of someone who'd accomplished what seemed impossible months ago. "Continue your work. But now you're part of a network. When you identify humans questioning their enhanced advantages, you help them understand context. When immortal activities risk premature exposure, you provide explanations that satisfy without revealing everything. When the questioners publish findings," he nodded to Damon, "you don't suppress them. You add commentary that provides nuance. We become the footnotes to their accusations," to Valkyne observed. "We become the context that makes accusations survivable." "Yes." Enoch smiled at the metallurgical metaphor. "For now, the Order remains small. 12 members, perhaps growing to 20 or 30 in the next generation. We don't recruit aggressively. We identify wisdom and invite it. The Order persists through quality, not quantity. And when revelation finally comes?" Kadak asked, his builder's mind wanting to see the completed structure. "We step forward," Methuselah answered, speaking for the first time since administering the oaths. "We reveal ourselves as humans who've known truth for generations. We present the unencoded documentation. We stand as proof that partnership was attempting to emerge long before official revelation. We're the evidence that not all deception was malicious, some was preparation." "That's remarkably optimistic," Damon said, echoing the skepticism that had defined his investigation. "That's remarkably necessary," Enoch corrected. "Optimism is a luxury. Necessity is survival. The Order serves survival for both species. That's why it will persist." The child's question. Talia's garden, 2 weeks later. Lyra found her mother in the garden, tending plants that grew too quickly, bloomed too perfectly, and responded to care with unnatural vigor. Even the plants around immortals showed the effects of their presence, genetic advantages spreading to everything they touched, subtle modifications that optimized growth without anyone consciously intending it. The garden was Talia's refuge, a place where she could work with living things without the weight of 6,000 years of intervention pressing on every decision. The plants didn't ask questions about divine nature. They didn't question their enhancements. They just grew, beautifully and vigorously, accepting care without demanding explanations. Lyra was 13 now, her hybrid nature becoming more apparent with each year. Neither fully immortal nor entirely human, she aged at rates that defied categorization. Her physical body developed slowly, making her look perhaps 10 years old despite being 13. But her mind raced ahead at speeds that sometimes frightened Talia, processing concepts and making connections that revealed just how much of her immortal parents' cognition she'd inherited. "Mama, am I human?" The question landed like a physical blow. Talia's hand stilled on the leaves she'd been examining, her healer's consciousness immediately recognizing this as the moment she'd been dreading for 13 years, since the day Lyra was born to immortal parents on a world of mortals, becoming something unprecedented. This being belonged entirely to neither species. "What makes you ask?" Talia kept her voice level, buying time to formulate an answer that was honest without being crushing, contextual without being evasive. "The other children age. I don't. Not at normal rates." Lyra sat on the stone bench, 13 years old but looking 10, aging at 1/3 human rate, demonstrating in her very existence the challenges the enhancement project had created. "They get sick. I never do. They ask questions about the gods and are satisfied with mystery. I ask questions and keep asking until I understand. I'm different. I've always been different." She pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself small in a way that broke Talia's heart. "Grandmother tells stories about the old world. The place you came from. She says we're refugees. That we arrived here fleeing catastrophe. That we found humans and chose to guide them. But she won't tell me if I'm one of the refugees or one of the humans. Am I a refugee, Mama? Or am I human? Or am I something else entirely? Astara. Of course. Zephyrus's mother had joined them in immortality decades ago, had watched her son fall in love with Talia, and had welcomed a granddaughter who was neither fully immortal nor remotely human. And apparently, Astara had been filling Lyra's head with stories, with context, with pieces of truth that Talia had been carefully avoiding. "What else did grandmother say?" Talia asked, needing to understand how much Lyra already knew before deciding how much more to reveal. "That we've been hiding. That humans don't know what we are. That someday there will be a revelation, and it might be violent." Lyra looked up, her eyes, Talia's eyes, impossible colors that no human possessed, holding too much understanding for 13 years. "Are we in danger, Mama? When will humans figure out that we've been controlling them? Will they hurt us? Will they hurt me because I'm whatever I am?" "We haven't been controlling." Talia stopped herself. Looked at her daughter. This brilliant, perceptive child deserved honesty more than comfortable lies. Who would figure out the truth regardless of what Talia said, whose hybrid intelligence guaranteed she'd piece together reality from fragments if the complete truth weren't offered openly. "Yes," Talia admitted, the word carrying the weight of 6,000 years. "We've been controlling them. Guiding them. They are manipulating their development while pretending it's divine inspiration. And yes, when they discover that, some will be angry. Possibly violent. You might be in danger because you represent everything we've done, the intervention, the enhancement, the creation of beings who bridge species boundaries." "Then why did you stay?" Lyra asked, her voice carrying genuine confusion rather than accusation. "Why not leave when it became dangerous? Why risk making me if revelation is coming and I'll be caught in the middle? Because leaving would cause more harm than staying. Because we care about humans despite the complications. Because..." Talia struggled for words that would make sense to a 13-year-old mind, even one enhanced beyond standard human capability. "Because when you help someone, you become responsible for them. And we've been helping for so long that walking away would be abandonment. But staying is control. So either choice is bad." "Yes." Talia felt something crack in her chest. That's parenthood, actually. And governance. And intervention. All choices are bad. You just pick which bad you can live with. Which costs are you willing to accept? Which harms are you willing to cause trying to prevent worse harms? Lyra considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything, her hybrid mind processing ethical complexity that most adults couldn't navigate. When she spoke again, her voice carried an understanding that terrified Talia, suggesting her daughter had already figured out more than anyone realized. "The other children call me blessed. Chosen. touched by divine favor. But I'm just engineered, aren't I? You and Papa made me this way deliberately. Same as you've been making enhanced bloodlines, creating people with advantages, calling it a blessing when it's really biology. Yes, Talia said, refusing to soften the truth her daughter had already deduced. Do they know? The enhanced families? That their advantages come from you? Some are figuring it out. Human scholars are documenting what we've done, Damon, Enoch, others. Soon, everyone will know. And they'll be angry that some bloodlines were chosen and others weren't. Probably. That's not fair. You created inequality and called it help. Yes. We did. And I regret it. But I don't know what else we could have done differently. Talia sat beside her daughter, feeling the weight of justifications that sounded hollow when spoken aloud to someone who could see through them. Not intervene? Let everyone struggle equally? That felt worse than helping some and hoping the advantages would spread naturally. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, processing with that hybrid intelligence that sometimes made her seem older than Talia despite 6,000 years of life experience. I think you made the same mistake all powerful people make, she said finally. You thought you knew better than the people you were helping. You thought you could choose for them and it would be okay because your intentions were good. But you never asked them. Never gave them a choice. Just decided what was best and imposed it. You're very wise for 13. I'm engineered for intelligence. Same as all your blessed bloodlines. You made me this way, then act surprised when I think clearly. There was no accusation in Lyra's voice, just observation, clinical assessment of cause and effect. When revelation comes, and grandmother says it will come soon, what happens to me? I'm obviously not human. Will they hate me because I represent everything you did to them? Talia pulled her daughter close, feeling fear she'd carried for 13 years finally manifesting in concrete questions that demanded concrete answers. I don't know. I hope they'll see you as a person, not a symbol. But people don't always make that distinction. Especially when they're hurt and looking for targets to direct their anger toward. Then we need to help them, Lyra said, her voice carrying certainty that seemed impossible from 13 years of existence. You and Papa and the others, you need to step forward before you're dragged out. Reveal yourselves honestly. Give them targets who can defend choices rather than hiding while humans fight each other over your legacy. You want us to reveal ourselves to protect you? I want you to reveal yourselves to protect everyone. Lyra pulled back, meeting her mother's eyes with intensity that made Talia's immortal heart ache. The enhanced humans who'll face backlash for advantages they didn't choose. The normal humans who'll feel betrayed by manipulation they never consented to. The immortals who'll be judged without full context if you stay hidden too long. Everyone deserves honesty. And the longer you wait, the worse the revelation will be when it finally comes. You're asking us to accept judgment before we're ready. You'll never be ready. No one's ever ready for judgment. Lyra's voice carried wisdom that seemed earned through lifetimes she hadn't lived. But you taught humans to value truth. Now show them you value it too. Practice what you've been preaching for 6,000 years. Talia looked at her daughter, 13 years old, brilliant beyond measure, carrying the weight of two species in her hybrid existence, and saw what revelation really meant. Not just immortals facing judgment, but beings like Lyra are caught between worlds. Children who'd done nothing wrong are bearing the consequences of choices made before they existed. You're right, Talia said quietly, the admission feeling like surrender and liberation simultaneously. About all of it. We need to reveal ourselves. Accept judgment. Face consequences. Make amends where possible and accept when forgiveness isn't offered. How soon? I don't know. But soon. Before the documentation groups force our hand. Before exposure happens on terms we can't influence. Before I'm older and remember being angry that you waited, Lyra finished. Yes. That too. They sat in the garden as the sun set, mother and daughter, immortal and hybrid, both carrying the weight of choices they'd never fully controlled. The warning signs had become personal. Revelation was inevitable. All that remained was deciding whether to face it honestly or wait until honesty was forced upon them. Lyra had made the answer clear. Honesty. Soon. Before more harm is compounded. The warning signs were everywhere. And finally, someone was listening, the prophet's final warning. Enoch's chamber. That evening, Enoch sat alone in his chamber, reviewing the day's work. The order was established. The 12 had taken their oaths. The bridge was built. But bridges required maintenance. And he wouldn't live to provide it. He pulled forward fresh tablets, beginning what would become the Book of Parables. The future projections Nyx had shared. The trigger points are approaching. The probability calculations that showed both catastrophe and hope, sometimes in the same timeline, sometimes separated by choices too small to see until they'd already been made. His stylus moved across wet clay with practiced precision, encoding truth in language that would seem prophetic to current readers but would reveal itself as probability mathematics to future generations with the technology to decode it properly. Year 2400 BCE, he wrote in the encoding that would survive 3 millennia. Enhanced power consolidation. The blessed bloodlines forget that they were chosen to serve, believing instead that they were born to rule. Conflict between those who remember partnership and those who know only privilege. He paused, seeing the future with mathematical clarity that felt like prophecy but was really just careful extrapolation of current trends. Enhanced humans had advantages. Advantages created power. Power created forgetting. Within 200 years, some enhanced bloodlines would lose the context of why they'd been given advantages, would start to believe their capabilities justified dominance rather than service. Year 1800 BCE. Resource conflicts are intensifying. Bronze requires copper and tin, which are limited resources, creating competition. If humans haven't learned to manage scarcity through cooperation, warfare escalates beyond control. 600 years in the future. The bronze economy is expanding beyond sustainable resource extraction. Trade networks are straining. Cities are competing for dwindling supplies of the metals that define their technological advancement. Without frameworks for equitable distribution and an understanding that scarcity was created by immortal accelerated development, humans would turn on each other. Year 1200 BCE. Technology cascade peaks. Ironworking, advanced mathematics, and the early scientific method, all emerging simultaneously. If wisdom hasn't kept pace with capability, tools become weapons. Civilization becomes its own destroyer. 1,000 years distant. The acceleration is reaching critical mass. Knowledge is spreading faster than understanding. Capabilities advancing beyond the wisdom to wield them safely. The moment when human civilization will either stabilize through developed institutional wisdom or fragment due to technology-enabled warfare that consumes everything is approaching. Year 500 BCE. Speciation completion. Enhanced and baseline humans are genetically incompatible. Two species sharing one world. If legal frameworks haven't established equality, one species dominates the other. 1300 years ahead. The point where reproductive incompatibility became absolute is significant. This is where enhanced and baseline humans could no longer produce viable offspring together. Two species, definitively separated by genetics, had been introduced. Either they built frameworks for equality by then, or they descend into the same speciation warfare that had destroyed the immortal homeworld. Year 1 CE. Environmental degradation has reached a crisis. 6,000 years of accelerated development have depleted resources and degraded the climate. If sustainability hasn't become practice, collapse becomes inevitable. 1,700 years in the future. The cumulative weight of immortal intervention stresses planetary systems beyond recovery capacity. Climate manipulation creates feedback loops. Resource extraction exceeds regeneration. Population growth is straining the carrying capacity. Either humans would have developed sustainability by then, or they'd face the environmental collapse that technology had temporarily forestalled but ultimately accelerated. 5 trigger points. 5 moments where humanity could either stabilize or collapse. 5 tests of whether partnership could emerge from control, whether wisdom could match capability, and whether two species could share one world without destroying it. He encoded them all as prophecy. As a divine warning. These are mysterious visions that future generations would study, debate, and try to interpret according to their theological frameworks. And when the time came, when humans were advanced enough to recognize probability projections disguised as apocalyptic prophecy, they would understand what Enoch had honestly been documenting. Not predictions. Possibilities. Not fate. Choices. The watchers will be judged, he wrote, his stylus moving with the weight of someone documenting judgment he wouldn't live to witness. Their intervention weighed. Their help and harm are measured. The Nephilim will stand between, neither fully condemned nor fully defended. And humanity will choose, forgiveness or revenge, partnership or separation, building together or burning everything in rage. He set down his stylus, feeling the weight of 180 years. Every year is visible in his consciousness, if not in his body. The warning signs were everywhere. The order was established. The documentation was nearly complete. All that remained was to live long enough to finish the work and hope that future generations would be wise enough to use it well. Outside his window, the city of Uruk slept, 50,000 humans dreaming human dreams, building human futures, unaware that their gods were refugees, their advantages were engineered, their entire civilization was an experiment in preventing trauma from repeating. The warning signs were everywhere. The bridge was built. The revelation was coming. And one old man sat documenting it all, hoping that the truth preserved would be the truth that saved rather than the truth that destroyed. The network activates. Across the known world, the newly sworn keepers began their work. In Memphis, Inara returned to her architectural studies, but now with access to immortal coordination networks. When she documented impossible building techniques, she no longer simply recorded them as mysteries, she provided context that prepared other scholars for eventual revelation without triggering premature exposure. In the Northern Territories, Bodhi resumed his mountain meditation, but now with a purpose that extended beyond personal enlightenment. When isolated enhanced bloodlines questioned their advantages, he provided philosophical frameworks that allowed them to understand genetic engineering without requiring belief in literal divine intervention. In the Indus Valley, Nama continued her astronomical observations, but now she encoded her findings using methods Enoch had taught her. Future scholars would find her work and recognize it as a bridge between religious mystery and scientific precision, proof that humans had been preparing for revelation long before it occurred. In Europe, Kadok returned to his building projects, training apprentices not only in stonework but also in the careful observation that would enable them to recognize immortal architectural principles when revelation made such recognition necessary. 12 humans, scattered across continents, connected through purpose and quantum network, serving as an early warning system and preparation infrastructure for the revelation that grew more inevitable with each passing year. The Enochian order was no longer just a proposal or a covenant. It was active, functional, beginning the work that would span millennia. And in Uruk, Damon sat in his documentation chamber, surrounded by evidence of immortal presence. He was no longer preparing to expose them immediately but was instead preparing humanity to understand them eventually. His investigation hadn't stopped, it had transformed. From accusation to translation. From exposure to preparation. From condemnation to context. The warning signs were everywhere. But now, finally, humans were building infrastructure to manage them. The bridge was operational. The work had begun. In both species, immortal and human, enhanced and baseline, knowing and unknowing, moved toward revelation that would test everything they built together. Nyx's assessment. In her orbital observatory, Nyx compiled data from the Order's first 2 weeks of operation. 12 humans coordinating across impossible distances. Documentation flowing through quantum networks. Context is being provided to questioning populations. Small interventions prevent premature exposures while preparing for eventual complete revelation. She ran updated probability models, incorporating the Order's existence into her calculations. Catastrophic revelation outcomes, 61% down to 54%. Not a dramatic improvement, but measurable. Real. In scenarios where margins determined survival, 7 percentage points mattered. Enhanced baseline conflict, 31% down to 27%. Technology cascade disaster, 23% down to 20%. Environmental collapse, 18% down to 15%. Each trigger point is marginally more survivable with the Order active than without it. Minor improvements could compound across centuries if the Order persisted, adapted, and future generations maintained the vision Enoch had created. It's working, Talia said, reviewing the same data from her own station. Not perfectly. Not dramatically. But working. The Order is actually making revelation more survivable. 7 percentage points isn't a miracle, Nyx cautioned, her mathematical precision refusing to oversell the improvement. 7 percentage points is 700,000 lives in some scenarios, Talia countered. 7 percentage points is the difference between total collapse and managed transition in others. It's not nothing. Nyx couldn't argue. The math was straightforward. The order improved outcomes. Not guaranteed success, nothing is guaranteed. But better odds than they'd had without it. Enoch built something remarkable, she said quietly. A human organization that serves both species simultaneously. That prepares for revelation by serving the concealment that makes preparation possible. That holds contradiction without collapsing under its weight. We should have done this millennia ago, Talia said. Should have trusted humans with the truth earlier. Should have built bridges rather than hiding. We did what we could with the wisdom we had, Nyx replied. Same as Enoch did. Same as the Order will do. We're all just trying to build something that outlasts us and serves purposes we can't fully envision. They watched the data streams, 12 humans coordinating, preparing, building infrastructure for a revelation that most of them wouldn't live to witness. Carrying truth across generations and maintaining purpose across centuries. The Enochian order was active. The warning signs were being managed. The revelation was still approaching, faster than planned, slower than feared, inevitable regardless of timing. But now, finally, both species have the infrastructure to face it together. That had to count for something. It had to be enough. The warning signs accumulated. The order is prepared. The revelation approached. And for the first time in 6,000 years, both species moved toward honesty. Imperfect honesty. Complicated honesty. Honesty that would take centuries to emerge fully. But honesty nonetheless. That was the real revolution. Not revelation itself, but the commitment to pursue it. Everything else would follow from that choice. End of chapter 20. Lyra is 13 years old. She's watched her parents manipulate human development while claiming it's help. She's seen the evidence accumulate, the questions multiply, and the discovery approach. And she tells her mother the truth immortals won't admit to themselves. You need to reveal yourselves before you're dragged out. Step forward honestly before exposure happens on terms you can't control. Practice what you've been preaching for 6,000 years. Enoch creates the order, 12 humans who know the truth, preserve documentation, and prepare frameworks for revelation. Insurance against immortal cowardice. The warning signs are everywhere. Discovery is inevitable. The only question is whether immortals control the timing and framing, or whether humans discover truth through investigation and render judgment without a complete context. Meanwhile, in Uruk, an enhanced human king has been tracking quantum signatures for 3 years. Following immortal patterns. Mapping where they disappear. In chapter 21, Lugalbanda walks into the hidden council chamber and speaks truth that changes everything. That's chapter 20 of the First Awakening. Lyra's right. But will the immortals listen? Let me know what you think. This is AI Narratives and Tales. Everything changes in chapter 21.